What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Magicka Nightblade. So the Magicka Nightblade still remains tops of the pecking order when it comes to Magicka DPS. They are still out-parsing pretty much every other class, so Sorks, Pet, Non-Pet, Wardens, Templars, DKs. Magicka Nightblades are still at the top of all these classes. They're still beating them all out. So you're still going to see a lot of Mag Nightblades, particularly in the new trials, Cloud Rest and Asylum particularly, but that that doesn't mean that the other classes are bad. It's just that the Nightblades do usually end up outparking them in pretty much all the trials in the game right now. So just like our other build videos, we'll be going over the gear, the skills, the CP point distributions, everything that you guys are going to need to know in order to recreate this build. Now, I do want to point out that this build is optimized around a raid scenario. So this is going to be a group that has Alkosh and has Crusher. So that's something you want to keep in mind when you're making your own build and kind of adjusting your CPs. This is really kind of specialized around having really good buff and debuff uptimes, things like that. This build is not necessarily going to fit all scenarios. It's not going to fit every single trials. You're going to need to swap builds around and things like that. So don't try to take this build as kind of set in stone. It's still flexible depending on your needs and what you need to use in order to really succeed. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here with our gear. So for monster helm sets, we are still going with Zaan. So Zaan is still the strongest monster helm set, although just like with something like Rothark, you do need to be within melee range in order for it to work. So if you're not able to be in melee range, if you need to play range DPS for instance, you would replace this with Skoria instead. Skoria or Lambris. Skoria is typically going to be better for Magicka Nightblades though. Now we do have medium and heavy pieces, one of each, and we do have a health enchant on one of the large pieces here, our head. That's just because we are using Witchmother's Potent Brew or the other gold food, so we will need to use a health enchant in order to get up to a good amount of health. However, all of our other enchants are going to be max magicka. Now all of our pieces here are divines, so our first set here is going to be Siroria. You can go with perfect or imperfect. The difference is that 5-piece additional max magicka bonus, which really doesn't make that big of a difference. It's kind of a nice to have, not a need to have kind of thing. So if you can't complete Cloud Rest +1 on that, it's not a big deal. You can just use normal Siroria. You don't have to use the perfect version here. Now I do have divines on all of my pieces. However, infused on your large pieces, assuming that you have a magicka enchant, will be just a hair stronger in pretty much most scenarios. However, I'd still like to go with all divines just because the difference there is pretty small. It's less than 0.5% when it comes to kind of ability metric. So it's not really going to be that big of a difference if you do infused or divines. I just go with whatever trait you happen to get first, or whatever trait you happen to know if you have to transmute a piece of armor. Now, like I said, it has to be magicka. So if like our head piece here, you would want this to be divines, not infused, because it is a health glyph, not a magicka glyph. That's something to keep in mind there. Now, Siroria is not going to be useful in all the trials, particularly in Asylum. In Cloud Rest, it's really hard to get up to that 20 stacks and to maintain those 20 stacks. So in those scenarios, you might want to run different sets. So Master Architect is another set that you might want to consider running, which lets you maintain Minor Slayer, but it does kind of rely on you using Soul Harvest instead of the Destro ulti as your main ultimate. There's kind of a weakness there, but other than that, another good set you can potentially use would be Moon Dancer, that allows you to maintain Minor Slayer. The RNG factor of the 5-piece, whether you get the spell damage or the spell magicka regen, kind of in the air. Both are useful in certain scenarios, but obviously, as a Nightblade, your regen is already really good, your sustain is really great, so it's not necessarily going to be the best option there. Then the other sets that you might want to consider using that are going to be easier, they don't have Minor Slayer, are going to be Burning Spellweave and Julianos. So those are the two other sets that you might want to use in the body if you don't have, if you're in a situation where Siroria is not going to be as strong because you won't be able to maintain the stack. So it's going to be like high mobility fights. For example, maybe the twins in Maw, the triplets in Behoff, and again Asylum and Cloud Rest. You might want to use Burning Spellweave instead of Siroria, or Master Architect, or Moon Dancer. Now for our second 5-piece, we're going with the Mother's Sorrow. Mother's Sorrow is a dropped set, so you're able to buy it off of Guild Traders. We have 3 spell damage enchants as a Magicka Nightblade. Your sustain is going to be really, really good, so you don't really need any sort of magic regen glyphs going on. So you're able to use all 3 spell damage glyphs. Now I have 1 Bloodthirsty and 2 Arcane. However, you can go with 3 Bloodthirsty if you want. You can go with all Arcane if you want. It's kind of up to you. 3 Bloodthirsty will pull the highest amount of DPS, and it's going to be at the very least the most consistent DPS. However, you can go with any sort of combination. The DPS difference between any of the combinations between Bloodthirsty and Arcane is going to be pretty small, usually within 1k DPS or so. So don't feel like you have to go through Bloodthirsty. You can just stick with the Arcane base trait if you would like. And then we have an Inferno Staff front bar. So this isn't going to be precise. This is actually going to be Infused. Let me just change it real quick. So we do have Infused as our front bar trait here. Infused is still going to be best in slot for Magicka DPS, so we have an Infused Inferno Staff, but the enchant has changed compared to Somerset. So previously it was Flame Damage enchant, and now it is a Berserker enchant. I'll get more on that later. Then for our back bar, it's going to be an Infused Maelstrom Inferno Staff, this time with a Flame Damage enchant. So why did we decide to switch around our enchants? Well, Zaan decided to change how enchants work. So now when you're on your back bar and you put down Blockade, if you swap to your front bar, you'll actually continue to proc your back bar enchant, in this case the Flame Damage enchant, and it will remember whether it is an Infused enchant or not. So you do want to keep that Flame Damage enchant on your back bar. Now why not keep Berserker on the back bar so that we have 100% uptime on Berserker? Berserker, or buffing enchants in general, do not proc off of weapon damage abilities. They only proc off of light and heavy attacks. So Berserker will not proc off of Blockade, and you can go ahead and test this yourself. That's why we had to swap where our enchantments are. So this way we get pretty much all the ticks we need to with the Flame Damage enchant, as long as we keep Blockade up. And then on our front bar we're able to maintain pretty good weapon damage uptime because we are on our front bar more often than on our back bar. And we do obviously want Infused in order to get a higher spell damage boost from that enchant there. So in Mother's Sorrow, you can replace this with any of the sets that I mentioned earlier. So particularly Burning Spellweave is probably the next best alternative for Mother's Sorrow if you don't have it. Julianus is not a bad choice, but Master Architect I would avoid because you would have to use Soul Harvest on your front bar, which is basically run the problem of where you're going to put all of your different abilities. So Master Architect I would not recommend as your front bar set, but Moon Dancer is a set that you could use as a front bar. You will be doubling up on Minor Slayer, so Burning Spellweave is going to be better overall because you will get that extra set bonus back. So I would not recommend Moon Dancer, but if that's the only set that you have available, then go with that if you would like. Otherwise I would just stick with Julianus or something like that. For our character sheet, we are a Dark Elves. Dark Elves are going to be the best option here. However, you can go with any of the really magically inclined races, so the High Elves, the Altmer, or the Bretons. They're perfectly fine options there. Dark Elves just get more of a boost to flame damage, which a lot of our damage does come from flame damage there, and you don't really need to sustain from High Elves as a Nightblade, so Dark Elves are going to be stronger overall. So those are kind of your 3 top race choices. If you want to be an Argonian, you can certainly be an Argonian. If you also PvP on the side, it might be a good idea to be an Argonian. You do get that extra health, so you don't necessarily use the health enchant or put points into health, but you do get less max magicka. You only get 3% max magicka versus 9 on the Dark Elves and 10 on High Elves and Bretons. So that's something they want to take into consideration when you pick your race. Now for your attributes, I have all my points into magicka. And you can see here I still have 16k health or so, which is usually enough for Magicka DPS because you do have shields, which helps protect you from any sort of damage. Now, if you do want more health, you can by all means put a couple points into health if you'd like. I usually put 4 if I feel like I need the extra health. But it's kind of up to you how you want to deal with that. I would not put more than 10 points into health. At that point, you're kind of giving up a little bit too much max magicka, and you're going to be losing some more DPS that way. For our Mundustun, we are going with the Thief. The Thief, even though we are going with the Berserker front bar, the Thief is still pretty strong. If I ran the math, and it does seem like Apprentice and Thief are pretty much neck and neck with each other. It all depends on the other set that you're using, obviously. But the Thief and the Apprentice, they're both fine choices. I'm just sticking with the Thief here, just because as a Nightblade, you get additional crit damage, so that kind of pushes the Thief just barely ahead of the Apprentice. And for food, we are using Witchmother's Potent Brew. You can go with Clockwork Citrus Filet if you would like. That's the gold food. This is basically a slightly upgraded version of Witchmother's, but it does use Perfect Row, so it is kind of expensive to get, so don't feel like you have to get it or use it. You can go ahead with Witchmother's Brew. That's perfectly fine for pretty much all the content in the game. Now let's go ahead and talk about our skills. So we'll start off with our front bar. So we have Impale, our Execute, Elemental Weapon as our spammable. You can use other spammables if you would like. You can go with your typical funnel health. It's if you need the extra healing. You can even go with Force Pulse or Crushing Shock if you like. It's kind of up to you. But Elemental Weapon is going to do the most damage and give you the best amount of sustain there. Crippling Grasp, Merciless Resolve, Inner Light, and the Destro ulti here on the front bar. Then on our back bar, this is where we put our shield, but in this case we have Elemental Drain for our Parse that we're going to do at the end of the video. We have Blockade of Fire, Twisting Path, Siphoning Attacks, Rearming Trap. If you are playing melee, you can use Rearming Trap. It's going to be a little bit better for sustain because it uses stamina rather than Magicka. However, if you have to play at range, obviously you can't obviously use Rearming Trap because it's a melee move. In that case, you would use something Challenge Acceleration instead. It's going to be a little bit worse for your sustain because it does use Magicka versus stamina, but you only got to cast it once every about 34 seconds or so, so it's not that big of a deal. And for our ultimate, we have Soul Harvest here, so we're not going to be using Soul Harvest unless you're using Master Architect too much. You can go with pretty much, for the Parse, we'll be doing a Destro ulti and then Soul Harvest every time afterwards. So if you're within melee range, Soul Harvest is not a bad option to use. However, you can just go with all Destro ultis if you would like. There's really not that big of a difference, even on a dummy Parse, between using like one Destro ulti and all Soul Harvest versus all Destro ultis. So it's kind of up to you. But if you are using Master Architect as your body piece, you will want to use Soul Harvest as your primary ultimate for the Major Slayer buff. Now for our CP points, so we have our CP cap has been raised. It's up to 780 now, down from 750 on Somerset. Gives us 260 points for each of the different constellation types. 75 Tenacity and Arcanist, not a big surprise there. Then we have 40 in Shadow Ward, 40 into Tumbling, and 30 into Warlord. I tried to kind of hit all the jump points, but you can see here we did miss a jump point on Warlord by 1. So that's kind of the downside of having these extra points here. Of course, you can play around with those kind of points however you'd like. You get 110 points after you put in the 75 and 75 into Arcanist and Tenacity. So you can kind of play around with that however you'd like, depending on the specific trial that you're running. And for our blue CPs, again, I am optimizing this around a optimized raid group. So we have Alkosh, we have Crusher going on, we have Minor Breach from either Stamplar or Minor Breach Poisons from the healer. So that's why we have 17 points with the Spell Devotion. If you do not have Alkosh, or you're using Torg's Infused Crusher, but no Alkosh, things like that, you're missing the Stamplar for Minor Breach, then you might need to put more points into Spell Devotion. So you're going to have to play that by ear. My best recommendation for that in that instance is we already don't have a lot of points in the Thaumaturge, just because a lot of our hardest moves do come from direct damage hits, but I'd recommend just taking out a Staff Expert first and then putting it into Spell Erosion if you do come to that point where you need to put more points in the Spell Erosion to get up to the penetration cap. We have 66 into Elfborn, 64 into Elemental Expert, 17 into Spell Erosion, 19 into Staff Expert, 66 into Master at Arms, and 28 into Thaumaturge. Now you can shift a couple of points from Staff Expert elsewhere. My first would be to probably bring Thaumaturge up to maybe around 34 or so. It's kind of up to you if you want to do that. On a dummy Parse, it's going to tell you to put more points in a Staff Expert because your weaving is going to take up a higher percentage of your DPS, but in a trial it could be the case, it might not be the case, so you can kind of play that by ear depending on how well you're able to do the mechanics and things like that. And for our red CPs, this is a more balanced approach, so this is good mitigation for all the trials, but not the best mitigation for all the trials. So in certain trials, you might want to shift some CP points around in order to get the best amount of mitigation. So for example, Maw, you're going to want more spell damage and direct damage mitigation compared to physical damage. So for here, we have 66 into Ironclad, 56 into Thick-Skinned, 64 into Hardened Elemental Defender. Then we have 10 into Bastion for the field position passive. So Magicka DPS are typically the first ones to ask to res people because you do have a shield. So you will have field position just for the additional damage mitigation. It's really, really useful, especially when you're in a progressing through a new trial or something like that. Alright, so I've pretty much covered everything that you guys are ready to know about the build. We're obviously going to be using Spell Power Potions, Major Sorcery, Major Prophecy, and the Magicka Restoration. That is made with Cornflower, Lady Smock, and Water Hyacinth or Namir's Rot. So for our rotation, we'll talk about a rotation. So you're going to want to just buff up first with your buffs. That's going to be Merciless and Leeching. Then it's kind of up to you if you want to start by using Rearming Trap or Channel Acceleration, depending on which one you're using. But I like to do it anyways. I start on the back bar normally. Now you will be doing a dynamic rotation, which means you do not have a static rotation. And your rotation is really going to be kind of be based around Merciless Resolve and that bow proc. Basically what it's going to be is you're going to kind of prioritize that bow proc first. So basically what it's going to be, I can't really do a full rotation, I didn't want to use my potions obviously, but basically what's going to be is you're going to be doing your rotation, maintaining your dots, Blockade, Path, Crippling, Grasp, but if you're on your back bar, so let's say I'm on my back bar and I need to reapply, let's say, Rearming Trap and Blockade, but after I apply Blockade, my bow proc is up. I will swap my front bar, use the bow proc, swap back to my back bar, and finish reapplying any dots that are up at that time. And it's going to make more sense when I do the 60-minute dummy parts, what I mean by a dynamic rotation. So, like the name suggests, it's going to be dynamic. It's not going to be fixed in stone, so you're not going to be like Blockade, Path, Trap, front bar, Crippling Grasp. It's not going to be like that. You're going to basically kind of be adjusting your rotation on the fly in order to account for that bow proc. That's going to be the most important thing to maintain. Get that bow proc off, because that's going to be a huge source of your DPS there. And again, it's going to make a lot more sense when we go into our 60-minute dummy parse. Now, in terms of the skills you want to keep up, the two main dots that you're going to want to maintain that are for damage are obviously going to be Blockade and Path. Those are going to be your two strongest dots. And then you have Rearming Trap for the minor force. You want to try to maintain that if you can, especially because Nightblades, again, have 10% additional crit damage. So that additional minor force really starts to add up. Then you obviously want to keep your buffs up, so that's Leeching for the sustain, or Siphoning I should say, and Merciless Resolve for obviously the bow proc. Crippling Grasp you don't really need to maintain, so for an execute, a lot of Nightblades will actually drop Crippling Grasp entirely, and they'll only maintain Blockade and Path. So you just drop Blockade, or not drop Blockade, you drop Crippling Grasp and you just spam your execute instead. And then in execute, you don't want to use your bow proc, and I'll show you guys at the end after the 60-minute dummy parts when we go over account metrics why that is the scenario. Basically what it boils down to is that your execute will do more damage than the bow proc, and I'll show you guys that when we do the combat report overview. So we're going to do this parse here so you guys can get a sense of what you're able to pull on the Magicka Nightblade. I am, again, on my laptop in Denmark, so it's not going to be necessarily going to be my best parse, but I will try my best to do an accurate representation of what the Magicka Nightblade is capable of accomplishing. So let's go ahead and get started. You can see here I got the bow proc off. So now, in terms of when you want to swap back to do the bow proc, some people will recommend doing it when your counter is at 4. Because then you do a light attack right into the bow proc. But you can wait until it says 5 if you'd like. It is going to be a slight DPS loss, but sometimes you do want to get that Blockade off or that Path off. But you still don't want to drop those dots for a bow proc. Ideally, you're able to not drop the dots. So you can see here that what I'm talking about when I say when your counter reaches or you can swap to the bow proc. And again, we're going to drop Crippling Grasp, but we will maintain Trap, Path, Blockade, and Merciless. Alright, so there we go. And that is our Parse right there. So, like I said, in Execute, you want to drop Crippling Grasp, and then you want to maintain, at the very least, Blockade and Twisting Path. Siphoning attacks, you can decide if you want to maintain it or not. If it's going to be a very long Execute, then I would recommend maintaining Siphoning attacks for the extra sustain, but sometimes you don't need to maintain it, and then you want to make sure Rearming Trap continues to be maintained for that minor force buff. So let's go over our combat report real quick. So 48.1k. I have pulled a little bit higher before. I've managed to pull like 49, 50k on some parses when I get some good RNG. So that's just kind of, this is a little bit on the low end here. So take a look real quick at where our damage is coming from. So light attacking, weaving is super, super important for a Nightblade, because this is where you're going to get all your Assassin's Wills. So you can see here, Assassin's Will, super, super strong. And this is one of the reasons why I said you don't want to use Assassin's Will in Execute phase, because your Execute hits pretty much as hard, if not harder, than Assassin's Will. So especially in Execute phase, that's why you don't want to use Assassin's Will, because even though it might be able to hit higher, so you can see here the max is higher than the max in Impale, the average is still higher on Impale overall, so you still want to use Impale only on your Execute. You don't want to use Assassin's Will if you can help it. Then Blockade and Twisting Path, you can see here that our Fiery Weapon, which is the flame damage enchant on our back bar, procced pretty much the entire time we were in combat. So really important to maintain that Blockade so you have all those fire damage enchants proccing there. And everything just kind of goes down from there. So you can see here Siroria, the 20 times buff was maintained for 86%, and that's pretty much like the most you'll ever be able to get. If you have, like, you're always in the Siroria proc, that's the highest you'll be able to get. Now, for, like I said, in more mobile fights, it's not going to be nearly as high if you ever get 20 stacks at all, even. So for things like Asylum or Cloud Rest, or fights like Twins and Female, again, you might want to swap something like Burning Spellweave instead, just because it's going to be a lot more consistent and stronger, because Siroria, if you're not able to maintain very good stacks, it's not going to be very strong overall. It's only going to give you anywhere from like 120, 150 spell damage, in which case you're better off just running Burning Spellweave instead, even though you do end up losing that minor Slayer bonus. And you can see here with the weapon damage enchant on our front bar, we got 87% uptime on it, so that's really, really good, and it did shift a little bit of the math behind the Munda Stone, but again, like I said, Thief and Apprentice both pull in really, really close in terms of just straight up ability metric. Alright, so that is it for this build video. If you guys have any questions or comments, anything about this build, or what I should use as a replacement for any of these parts or skills, gear or skills, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.